Okay. So while we could say displacement is not a new phenomenon, the scale of the current crisis is unprecedented because right now more than 140 million people worldwide have been forced to flee their homes, who are forcibly displaced. And we are dealing with the highest number of displaced people since the Second World War. And of course, the evident causes are conflict, violence, climate change, poverty, and food insecurity. So refugees and migrants actually are, we could say, ordinary people who have been forced to cross boundaries and borders in search of safety for their families. They are those who are suffering nowadays more than any other vulnerable group. So the term refugee, if we want to define, is someone who, due to well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, is outside the country of his nationality. And if we talk about migrants, there is no universally accepted definition of the term migrant, but we could say that it's any person who changes his or her country of usual residence. And this definition includes people who are moving or have moved across international borders regardless of legal status. Although governed by separate legal frameworks, refugees and migrants are entitled to the same universal human rights and fundamental freedoms as other people. So we have seen here the facts, the key facts nowadays, more than 1 billion are on the move. We are facing the lack of access to basic services, environmental degradation, the conflict all these causes, and social, political, economic exclusion also. We all know how can this result in poverty, homelessness, and exploitation, and how the COVID pandemic, especially, this crisis has exacerbated existing inequalities. So all these groups actually have a variety of different physical and mental health needs, which are shaped by experiences in their country of origin, their migration journey, their host country's entry and integration policies, and of course, living and working conditions. So these experiences can increase the vulnerability of refugees and migrants to chronic and infectious diseases. And all these barriers that they're facing, especially to access to health services, we know how they can be, suffer from diseases, how they can be at risk for poor mental health disease because of traumatic experiences, especially those who are coming from war conflict zones. And the other cases have to do with employment, income, education, and housing. So we could say that there are vulnerable members. So it's groups that have to deal with xenophobia, discrimination, housing, working conditions, and they are often excluded from national programs for health promotion, disease prevention, treatment, and care. And the worst has to do with people with disabilities, women, and young people, of course. What is happening? We know that the COVID pandemic has exacerbated the problem, as I said before. So during this period, refugees and migrants experience little and social insecurity. The number of displaced people surpassed, as I said before, it's actually a record level. The number of refugees were already the record high before also Ukraine. But now we're talking about a huge humanitarian crisis all around the world. And remember that the refugees wait an average of 20 years to be resettled and assimilated. The most urgent refugee crisis around the world, Syria, Ukraine, Afghanistan, South Sudan, I think we all know, Yemen, it's experiencing the worst hunger crisis. For several organizations who are who strive to help displaced people with immediate basic needs for clean water, for shelter, for food and work, but advocate also for the long-term well-being. For instance, Oxfam try to offer humanitarian aid and programs and campaigns and all these things, but of course, a lot more have to be done. So what is happening about education? I think this is the most urgent issue nowadays, especially for countries like Greece, who receives a great number of refugees. And education is, we could say, an instrument of social integration, and a means through which we can construct identity. Access to information and knowledge influences access to employment, socioeconomic integration, and development. At the same time, it is a tool through which identity, perceptions, and understandings, real or imagined, are developed. So the way that the dominant cultural majority frames the educational system and the values that it propagates through schooling, through methods, through curricula, expresses and defines perceptions of our own identity and understandings of the other. So just as it can be inclusive and a vehicle through which we can promote principles of social cohesion, of solidarity, of equality, it can at the same time equally propagate prejudice, stereotypes, perceptions of cultural confrontation, superiority, or discrimination. Therefore, I would say that the challenge now for a heterogeneous society is to meet raised expectations for educational policies. What we need educational policies that are culturally sensitive, that enhance educational socialization and personal development opportunities for students of all communities, that are able to respond to the needs of the entire student population. So one of the main challenges of the Greek government has been facing is the integration of the Greek society of all recently arrived refugees and other migrants who remain in the country, because faced with this increasing and changing diversity as a result of immigration, Greek society and the state have been called to respond, to adapt, and formulate adequate policies through which we can manage these transformations. So I could say also about migrants that 52% migrant children and over 90% of displaced children live in low and middle income countries. And of course, some of them, they live in deprived urban areas, slums, overcrowded camps, settlements, without sufficient sanitation and clean water. So in Greece, there are approximately 100,000 refugees and asylum seekers, and the majority of whom are children and youth. Over 60% of refugees are under the age of 30, and more than 5,000 are accompanied minors. Some of them are living on Greek Aegean islands, where actually where the conditions are difficult. The refugee crisis in the Greek Aegean islands has reached actually an untenable situation, which requires urgent action by the Greek authorities and the international community, because the future of these children are precarious and their daily reality is extremely harsh. I know firsthand, because I have worked as a volunteer with refugee children, and also I was appointed as a teacher in a remote island in Samos, remote islands far away from Athens, and there are many refugee children. So I had the chance to work with these children and know from firsthand how and what are the challenges that they are facing. So the daily reality is extremely harsh, especially for the most vulnerable women, children, and unaccompanied minors. And to make matters worse, the COVID crisis threatened to take hold among a refugee population that has no access to health care. And we all know what happened also since the start also of the armed conflict in the territory of Ukraine in February 2022, thousands of refugees entered also Greece and seeking residency and civil protection. So in May 2023, the number of Ukrainian refugees in Greece was approximately 27,000, among them many children. If we talk about Palestinian refugees in Greece, now after this war crisis, Palestinians account for 22% of legal entries to Greece. And this, of course, the migrant pressures, which increase significantly since the growing violence of Hamas attack in Gaza. So what is happening now? How are ministers are trying to handle this case? The education sector I would say that is probably one of the most sensitive and politically charged areas of public policy because of its defining role in identity formation, national cohesion, and national consciousness. It is equally one of the most important sectors in socioeconomic terms since it defines access to the job market, personal economic development. The questions could be, how has intercultural education been designed in Greece in response to growing immigration? First of all, we have the National Protection Act, which actually frames education as a right and obligation of children seeking asylum in Greece, adding that children that do not enroll or don't attend classes because they don't wish to join the education system shall face reduction of material reception conditions, while parents at the same time shall face the same sanctions applicable to Greek citizens. Actually, the greatest reform took place in 2016 when the Ministry of Education took tangible measures with a view to systematically including refugee children in the national education system, a specific framework, and it was a great reform from Greece. So the education system for refugee children contains this structure, more or less, kindergarten inside reception education centers. The reception facilities for refugee education is what we call is, usually consist of afternoon classes in the installations of primary, secondary public schools, and the reception classes within what we call here education priority zones, addressed to children who lack the necessary Greek language skills to fully integrate into the education system without support. And of course, we have appointed refugee education coordinators. So in 2016, we have all these reception educational programs and facilities for refugee children up to 15 years old. This is how this structure started. During the COVID pandemic, we know what happened. 2020, there were many refugee children were actually excluded. This period led to record levels of exclusion of refugee children from the Greek system of education. There were problems like transportation, also at the camps. There was a lack of necessary technical infrastructure for online learning at the camps. And of course, negativity and the biases also for the local community because of these health concerns. So this was a difficult period for the refugee issue. So we could say that, however, there were some improvements in 2022. However, although the number of refugee children who enrolled in education increased, this was a factor. However, only 75% were actually attending school later in March, and this highlights a concerning degree of dropout. Dropout could have many, of course, reasons have to do with the difficult living conditions. Deficiencies, of course, in design implementations of this system in Greece are teachers who are often employed part-time or for a few hours. They cannot afford to relocate far from their home. The number of recruited teachers also is insufficient. The means also to transport refugee children to the schools may be unavailable or insufficient also. So risks of dropout, overlap between zone of educational priority mainstream classes, barriers in the asylum procedure, precarious living conditions, interrupted living, medical examination, vaccinations, movement restrictions, inaccessible remote learning, and let's not forget also about the misperceptions of the community. So here is the most important, what are the challenges now for the new educational structure? Perhaps I think the most pressing issue involves the communication between teachers and refugee children, especially when very young children are concerned. Knowledge of the English language should not be taken for granted. This means communication problems and therefore difficulties in transferring knowledge. A great number also of refugee children remember that they have not attended school for several years since some home countries are at war. And their everyday routines, including education, were interrupted long ago. Therefore, there is more effort is needed to successfully integrate these children from war zones into the education system of the host country. Some children also, due to special circumstances in their home countries, although they are of school age, have never attended school. This means that the integration of such children is a big challenge also. There are no books and teaching material suitable for refugee children. And up to now, we have also for children of Muslim Greeks and Thrace. Of course, we don't talk about technology, which could be very useful here. Mentioned before about the number of teachers, which is insufficient, teaching vacancies, the number of full-time teaching. There are also parents who refuse to allow the children to attend schools, especially girls. It's all about also misperceptions. Refugee children over 15 years old are those more in danger of finding themselves marginalized, since they soon will have to integrate the labor market without any qualifications. Of course, the number of children is not stable. We could say that this system is pretty loose. There's a good number of dropouts. And local communities are often misinformed about a refugee crisis. Some are afraid that refugee children carry diseases, while in practice, they're vaccinated before they're sent to school. So many challenges, and what are recommendations now? What are some ideas for interventions? Refugee parents should be persuaded first to allow the children to participate in education, whichever form it takes. Sociologists, of course, psychologists could prove useful, especially for children who experience traumatic, who have traumatic experiences during wars, because according to all research data, these children will require over 5 years to recover and to be integrated and in the education system, and to increase their academic performance. Refugee parents should be persuaded to allow their children, and these classes to expand further. Maybe that would be useful to include hotspots on the islands. Of course, we need to continue to conduct regular monitor on this and evaluation. We need the precise data on this. The wide publicity campaign regarding refugee health issues also is important. And it would be useful to speed up the integration of refugee children into the local student population. The means of education should ensure smooth and uninterrupted access to students. Segregation in the education system should be prevented, and public health measures should be not discriminatory. And of course, efforts to integrate young children below 5 years old should be reinforced, especially those who attend these reception classes. What happens in Greece Education Action Plan for Ukrainian students? It was a European task force with the aim of establishing access to knowledge, has stimulated actually Greece in order to implement a new education plan. So what we did here, first of all, we created a new digital platform, which had two main functions: to register first a request from the Ukrainian education community. This documents a needs for equipment for training materials, technical assistance, and we set up a mechanism that addresses educational needs of Ukrainian refugees in cooperation with member states and business sectors, civil society organizations. Our Ministry of Education also has implemented actions with collaboration with the Institute of Educational Policy that support the Greek educational community and assist teachers' work. We developed very important bilingual Greek and Ukrainian handbooks with information on how to register in the Greek education system and the protocols for the prevention and treatment of coronavirus, and other useful materials which will have to do with a guide for Greek education in Ukraine with contact information for schools and dictionaries. We have also offered intensive Greek language learning programs. Ukrainian students also with little or no knowledge of Greek could attend Greek language courses for some hours per week, reception classes. And for the remaining hours, Ukrainian students could be integrated in regular Greek classes to attend courses in which language communication is not the primary vehicle of understanding. We also implement many teacher training programs. We added extra modules on intercultural education, very important. Multilingual support guide for teachers was developed, and not only Ministry of Education, we collaborated with UNICEF and others and other non-governmental organizations. The Ministry of Migration developed online multilingual tools to facilitate the entrance of Ukrainian refugees in Greece, the first accommodation, the integrations into school, in order to address all these health issues and support unaccompanied children. The Ministry of Labour, Agriculture and Tourism undertook the responsibility of recording the needs of the Greek labour market for seasonal or permanent staff. Of course, we collaborate with some non-formal refugee education providers, UNICEF mentioned before, Metadresi, ELIX, and before concluding, I want to say that, of course, these problems, education will not address all the needs of those extremely vulnerable children and young people, but it is essential missing component to help them survive the unacceptable humanitarian conditions they are living in today, to begin to heal and build a better future for themselves. So I believe that the issue of education of students with different linguistic and cultural background is not something that involves only the students who differ culturally and linguistically from the majority. Instead, it's something that concerns the whole of education, both at micro level as a social institution, and at the micro level of a classroom. So thank you very much for your attention.